just for those who are coming in on this, could you just summarize your situation? Because obviously
Sure.
you're trying to get access to your daughter, but just a little bit more detail. Being transatlantic, there's levels of complication to it, aren't there?
Yeah. So it was a little bit of a complicated relationship where I was trying to spend as much time in London with my partner as possible. Um, and I'm based in the US in Washington, D.C. And that became a little bit more challenging during the pandemic, but also I was able to work remotely. So I was able to come over for months at a time instead of weeks. Um, and that was nice. We had a daughter who was born close to Christmas in 2021, and the first year, maybe the second half of the pregnancy, and the first half year was really rocky. I think, and doctors that are friends think that it was just a super severe case of postpartum depression on top of exhaustion and a lot of other things going on. But for whatever reason, um, we we're no longer a functional couple, and we tried a little bit to see how we could get out of that with counseling, etc., and just could not make it work. Um, and so at that point, I tried to start having conversations around how we could be functional co-parents. And this may be a little too in the weeds, but she was unwilling to have those conversations because I was trained in mediation and negotiation, and she thought that that somehow gave me a leg up. And there were lots of conversations around her ability to have friends or lawyers look at agreements and things like that before we kind of embraced those. It didn't work. We went to mediation, and there were things that each of us found to be problematic with regards to what the other one was putting forward in co-parenting agreements. I'm sure she felt like my requests were just as ridiculous as I felt her requests were. I think when you look at the law and those interpretations, I wasn't too far outside of the realm of the norm, but we'll see how all that shakes out over time. So mediation had a session. We basically spent an hour and a half re-agreeing to the degree of phone conversations that we were having at that point. And so really made no progress. I wrote the mediator and laid out, here are my concerns around areas that seem to be just absolutely incompatible. I will confess to not being willing to compromise on a couple of these things that Natalie, that my partner felt like are really crucial. And I asked my partner if she agreed with that letter going forward. And so we submitted that to the mediator, and the mediator said, I don't see a way forward. You need to pursue arbitration or court. And so at that point, I encouraged that we pursue arbitration, was told there wasn't an understanding of what arbitration was. I encouraged my ex-partner to use Google because there's all kinds of resources online. And
Or
was told
the resource hub. We've got information about it there. She could have registered for free and find out all about it.
that's true. I think we didn't know about that at that point, but yeah, it just swirled around for a long time, and I felt like she was just dragging her feet for no particular reason. And so this is 4 months then since I'd seen my daughter, and I was sharing that I was coming to the UK to see her and to file papers with court if she wasn't going to be willing to move into arbitration, at which point I got hit with multiple protective orders. And it's been a lovely encounter with the court system since, trying to go through a series of hearings. Right now, we're both being assessed for mental health issues, and the final hearing is scheduled for early March, at which point we'll either go to trial or hopefully the judge will recognize that we both, I'm sure, have our own shortcomings, but there's no reason that we both can't be good parents to our daughter.
You've been really good about working with different professionals and finding your way, because even when I send people to a lawyer, I'm always, as you know, quite strict about don't use them any more than you have to. These are the things they can do, and the rest you can do with that person. And introducing you to Celio helps with kind of that divorce admin stuff, because It's quite overloading. So perhaps could you say a little bit about just the overload? Because I think a lot of men in particular take far too long to come along and get all this support. They try to do it themselves and they try to do it with a lawyer and then it just end up completely exhausted.
I think some of the different services that you provide would be absolutely crucial for me at various points in my life. Like sometimes I've lived overseas and been away from like family and friend networks and things like that. And um, I would have had more than I tapped into, I think, in terms of some of those options. I think also there are things that you had shared that I've not taken advantage of, but may need to in the next year, because Natalie still hasn't been willing to have discussions around finances, and um, that's looming. And it's also particularly messy because we weren't married, and so
Yeah.
there needs to be a high degree of reasonableness from both of us in terms of what's feasible and what's needed and how we make that happen. I'm not seeing a whole lot of reasonableness in our interactions, but I'm hoping that may come in time. So some of the different options that you presented in terms of like, here's somebody that can help really lay out where you are, both in the short term and long term, and like how you can kind of negotiate that path, I think is probably something that we will need to turn to. But there's a small chance that may not be necessary. But so far there's been kind of a unique twist in terms of working with Celia. I don't know if it's something that she would really want to do on a regular basis, but she's kind of served as a point of departure from a legal consulting perspective. And what I mean by that is, as I've pulled together statements, et cetera, she's kind of taken those and then really helped clean them up and ask questions and try and make things a little clearer and more, some things a little more gracious. And so she also charges less than the solicitor, who also you were able to help me get somebody at a really good rate. And so, there's some real benefits there as I've watched my bank account hover near zero for a long time.
Can I just point it out for anyone who's listening that Celia's ex-family lawyer, and you're right, she's very helpful with dealing with I call the divorce admin. So a lot of things you can do yourself, but that's still a lot, especially if you've got a job, and it can be overwhelming. So she's able to support that sort of DIY element, which of course saves a lot of money, and she definitely charges a lot less than she did when she was a lawyer. But her having that background really, really helps, I think. But what she loves to do, of course, is the more sort of visioning, coaching. What do you want to do going forwards? And because the two are really important, and you don't want to get stuck in the just in the immediate details, which sometimes you have to. You've got court orders flying around, you have to respond. Then you just need to know, you need to have still hold that perspective of the future. Could you say a little bit about that? Because I think it's such an important thing. Because again, often people who are will come in, not always just the men, sometimes the women too, who just think, right, it's just this is an admin thing and it's a process and we have to get to the other side of it. But it is actually important to hold a vision of a particularly a hopeful vision when you've got a lot going on, because you can't just do it all left brain, can you?
Yeah, I think even the solicitor dean has been, he was enough of a cheerleader that I told him, I'm going to be okay. Like if I get too despondent, I will set up calls and you can kind of walk me through that there is a silver lining that exists. But as for now, like I'd rather pay you to get your expertise on the legal matters, and I can deal with my effort to try and keep my head up and hope that the better things await. In even going through some of the ins and outs of the ways that Celia provided the legal support, I felt that probably 10 to 15% of that time was actually a little bit more focused on help me her saying, help me understand this situation. Have you thought about this? Have you tried this? And here's some things that sometimes work for others. So there was a little bit of that kind of reflective coaching that was taking place in the background, even though it wasn't the priority of the things that we were working on. I think that's a little bit of who she is as a person, a little bit of what she's able to bring, both from her legal background and also where she is today. And so there was a nice confluence there, and time will tell, like where some of those things lead, but it was helpful both to see and think through what some of those challenges were legally, but kind of from the more, how do you make this work on a day-to-day basis, and whether that's talking about my relationship with my daughter or my ex, or how we might potentially be functional in the future, and if not, what are the bare minimums that you need to have in place. And so yes, some of those things are very much required by the courts, but trying to think through the ramifications of different pathways that could be taken, I think was really helpful to get
Brilliant
guidance and feedback, because I'm not from the UK, and so that added, I'm sure, a lot of frustration to everybody that's been working with me, because the terms are weird and the process is a little bit foreign. I'm not even sure I know the process that well here in the US, but it's been really nice to have somebody that's patient and can help explain, this is what you're looking at, and these are the possible outcomes, and these are the additional considerations that go beyond the initial point of departure that you're probably hyper focused on right now.
And you mentioned earlier about there might be some people that maybe you'll need later. And for me, that it's really important that you have a kind of what I call a virtual team of people. And I always say, have a conversation, because when you're a member of the secret divorce group, part of the benefit of that is you can have as many introductions as you like, and they're apart from the odd lawyer, most of them are all completely free initial interactions. So you can work out what they do, whether you like them, and whether or not you need them now, or maybe you need them later. And I feel that that's it's sometimes I worry that I'm sending all these invites out there, and I don't want people to go into overwhelm. But do you think it's useful to have those conversations, to take advantage of those introductions, and just know those people are there if you need them?
I think it's incredibly helpful to know that those resources exist, because I didn't really know about any of those possibilities. There was a site, and I can't remember what it is now because I've not used it for a few months, but it was a fathers association for
Families Need Fathers.
Thank you. So I found Families Need Fathers to be a little bit hard to access at the beginning, but then incredibly valuable once I got into it. Even if you aren't taking advantage of some of what they have to offer, the fact that they put so much out there that you can kind of understand all the swirling possibilities and the language and documents and what's out there, they're really helpful for kind of grounding you within the process and helping you see what may be looming. So that was something that I found to be really useful. And I think there was a little bit of a frustration because there were some things that were harder to access from overseas. But I think if I were in the UK, it would have been that much not easier, that much better, to be able to turn to them. The other piece, which was helpful, was a little bit of interaction with you, Susie, because there were a couple of times where you really helped me kind of sequence out both my understanding of the process as well as, like, this is something that you need to do yesterday. And these are things that you might want to consider as you move forward. And probably this is your first step and this is your second, because otherwise it's a lot of things that are out there. For the most part, I thought the descriptions and roles, were all quite clear. But understanding, some of these you really might want to be able to activate immediately, and this is what they can do for you. Others are potentially long-term, and some of the things that you shared also weren't just the expertise of people, but even platforms and things like that you could access different tools online and things within that nature. So all of those things were helpful to know. I've tapped into probably a couple of the tools that you'd put forward too, from um, different kind of groups, advocacy groups, as well as software platforms for communications that you'd recommended. And so those have been proving useful, again, at various stages. I didn't need some of these at the very beginning, but I can recognize I'm going to probably need a couple that I haven't even started to engage with yet. And the
Do you give some examples?
um, sure. So just this last week, I downloaded a platform that you'd recommended called Our Family Wizard,
Yeah.
and anticipate starting to utilize that, or active. I don't know how you say it, but activate that this
Well,
next week.
it's just for anyone listening. It's a fantastic platform. It's very affordable. I mean, I do have in the Resource Hub a link to a free co-parenting online diary, which is fine if everything's reasonably okay. But when it's tricky, and your situation is definitely tricky, then Our Family Wizard is much. It even has downloadable templates for court forms. You can go. It's been the case in America and I think Canada for a while, but now even in England, you can ask a judge to say, right, my ex has dragged me into court over access to the child or children. I want to leave this with a court order that doesn't just give me access, but where my ex has got to use this platform to communicate, and they can say yes and make them do that and pay their own subscription to it as well, which is just absolutely essential, because it means it's very stressful, isn't it, when you've got a difficult person. It's bad enough when they won't communicate, but then when they do, and it's through text or WhatsApp or emails, and your heart sinks. You shouldn't have to deal with that. You have an app and you go, I'm ready now. Click, and they can't delete anything, and it's there. It's evidence, everything in there, and it's and if any, it may allows a court or a lawyer to look at it and go, hang on a minute, this seems pretty clear what's going on here. And that, I think, is the problem with children cases, because you'll be saying one thing, your co-parent saying another. How does a court know? And which is why it's always, we're talking a lot about court here, and I think I should again frame this. Obviously, I spend most of my time helping people stay out of court. It's amazing how much you can use mediation. There's arbitration, but sometimes you just have someone who's going to be so difficult that they drag you into that situation. And sometimes, as was your case, it is like you need a lawyer now to to block this court order, because there are times when the other person will basically weaponize the family law system against you, which is very much what you had happening to you. But you jumped on it. You're in that process. How I'm always admiring how hopeful on the whole you do remain, because it is very challenging, and it must be very difficult some days to think, how can I just deal with this person? But you always seem to be able to keep the door open and allow the possibility that her behavior will change. Do you feel that through the people you've been working with, there is a sense that as you learn to put in the boundaries, to take control of the situation, to change that relationship, the way you're working with someone who's, for want of a better word, could be called a bit controlling in how they're using a child as a weapon, really, that has allowed you to not wave a magic wand and make everything okay, but to have some hope that actually over a period of time these things could change, because kind of she might just have to eventually.
Yeah, so there's a few different layers in a response to that question, and some of them may not be helpful as you're editing. But so I work on conflict prevention and mass atrocities and things like that. And so if I wasn't able to at least find a silver lining from time to time, I'd have a very miserable life. So there's a little bit of that that's just in my DNA. While I am hopeful, I feel like kind of whenever this case is done before the court, there's going to be probably a 3 to 6 month window for Natalie to maybe recognize that what she was doing wasn't particularly helpful for our daughter. And if that light bulb doesn't go on then I anticipate lots of fun time with the British court system in the years to come, because I think she's just going to return and try and find other ways to manipulate things in order to get whatever outcome it is that she wants. And I honestly am a little bit foggy about that. But in terms of,
But just to reassure you on that, that should become much more difficult. So if you're using a form of communication like our family wizard, and let's say she just refuses to use it, that doesn't
Mhm,
look good to a court. It's just very quickly you work out, hang on, who's the difficult one here? And I think
mhm,
courts are getting more and more fed up. They don't want to deal with parenting issues. They just don't understand why you can't sort it out outside of
mhm,
the court. So if you've got one person blocking, um, by putting in those boundaries, saying this is how we communicate, this is, which is a very reasonable and sensible suggestion that's to her
mhm,
benefit, just on that alone, it indicates that something's not right. So it'll be harder and harder for her to find a solicitor who won't just go, this isn't going to look good if this is all you've got. And so because they can see that actually you're not the monster that she might be making you out to be, and that you're
mhm.
doing everything reasonably and sensibly and for the benefit of the child. So yeah, it could be that she doesn't get reasonable in that 6 month period, but it will be harder, much harder for her to continue, because I think the climate is finally changing a little bit. But it's about you sticking it out, really, because a lot of dads give up and they just go, I'll wait till they're older and they can come and find me." And I always go, no, don't do that. And
There have been, well, actually, I've got three or four things. I'll try and move quickly because I don't
that's
want
all
to
right.
chew up too much of your time. But there's two interesting anecdotes that might be helpful for you as well as others. And one is that during the first hearing, the judge basically castigated both of us and said, "You seem to be highly competent professionals. You need to just sit down and talk and sort this out. There's no reason for this to be here." And my solicitor Dean had shared also that our case is before I think it's called the High Central Court of London. And he was like, "This is the court system in all of the UK that is being most abused by one parent trying to manipulate the entire circumstance, and the judges are absolutely fed up. And so there's a much uh, lower appetite to tolerate things when they can see through what's actually appearing before them." And so that's just maybe some extra reinforcement to what you were just sharing. I
Glad to
don't
hear
have
it.
this place
Glad to hear
otherwhere, but other places. But
it.
and then a couple of other things I think uh, the the solicitor has basically said this is at the very beginning he's like, there's a small chance we go to the hearing and it gets thrown out, otherwise you need to be prepared that this is going to drag on for a while. And also right now currently in the systems everybody's overloaded, from the cases before the courts to the CAFCAS officers that are doing the reviews, etc. And so everything's that much slower than it should be. And obviously that means that at the end of the day, the kids are the ones that are feeling that impact. Um, I appreciated the fact that there was some efforts to help me recognize this isn't something where we could just sit down and sort it out overnight. And I think both he and Celia have been really instrumental in, I'm human, so some of the limited communications or the stuff I'm processing in the statements, et cetera, it just seems beyond the pale. And um, I'm not getting spun up to the point of wanting to lash out, but I mean, it sometimes feels really despondent looking at things. And uh, they both are pushing, like, what's important is your daughter. It doesn't matter what's said. It matters what can be proved and how you respond to that. And so you keep your head up and you make sure that your responses are truthful and you're bringing forward as much evidence as possible. So I think those things are, I don't know how they would have hit other people, but they've been really helpful for me. And I've been really appreciative to get, that kind of keep going. We're going to get through this mindset to it.
And what other support have you had? So I've actually got two new people who I'll send you some info about actually on the site, because the well-being aspect is so important. And I know Celia does quite a lot of that, but sometimes you can't be a good solid healer. That's their job. And one, for example, she deals with trauma, specifically areas of trauma, which are is massive when you're going through these things. And I think a lot of people don't realize until later how, you know, physically traumatized they are until they get triggered by other things. And these are things that can be dealt with. The hypnotherapist who does lots of work with with stress and learning techniques using EFT to be able to be in a good situation, which is, you know, when you're about to write that letter or go into a mediation session or go into the courts.
Mhm.
I personally believe these are really important, that they're not on the top list of most people dealing with a difficult access case or a divorce, but actually I think they're really important. How have you managed to sustain yourself? Have you even had a chance to even look into that properly and give yourself some time for that?
Yeah. But in terms of like how I've been dealing with issues of well-being, um, am running an organization now that was not in the best of financial positions, and so I had a lot of overinvestment of free time and trying to get that to a good place, and we're about there now, so that's good. But that, I think, kept me from sitting around stewing a whole lot. There have definitely been days that I just get out and get on my bike and go for a ride and try and get the blood moving and not necessarily distract myself, because sometimes I think about this, but it just helps a lot. And then I have I'm really blessed with a great family, and talk to them, and they're able to um, just kind of put things in perspective and reorient and show some support. And I have a couple of friends that are quite close. One's a neighbor, and others that I talk to regularly. One's a trained psychologist, and
That's handy.
um, yeah, and so the ability um, to process is there. And a lot of what I've focused on isn't so much on, have I done what I need to do today? Maybe that's to my own detriment, but the ability to try and figure out, because mine isn't so much about processing what's happening with the relationship with
Mm.
my child's mother, but trying to figure out how I can establish the relationship with my child. And so I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out, am I able to create the life for her, whether she's only here, with her mother, or whether she's in my full custody and care, or anything in between. Like, am I becoming a person that, I would want to be her dad? Um, and so that kind of gets me away from I can't believe this just happened, or she just said this, or whatever, and pushes me to a place where hopefully I can do a little bit of visioning work, and not just like being stuck in my head, but oh, if there's a toddler potentially going to be running around the house, like,
Yeah.
do I have the things that need to go in all the sockets so she doesn't electrocute herself and stuff like that? So, the little bits and pieces like that keep me sane. And some of it's been a little bit sad because, I've gotten toys and things like that for her because I thought by now we'd be together,
Mm.
even if it was just for a short period of time. And I've been able to pass those along to friends who have their own little ones to take care of, because mine's now outgrown some of that stuff. But
Mm.
we'll get to that point, I hope, in time, and yeah, see where that takes us.
For most people, however challenging mediation might be, at some point you've got to cut some kind of a deal. You've got to agree to something. So for most vaguely rational people, that can work, especially if they create a proper co-parenting plan and they go in prepared and don't just leave it all up to the mediator. Um, and then you've got arbitration, where you've got your private judge. I mean, that's the most sensible alternative. If you're just not going to agree, get the arbitrator to look at the co-parenting plan, look at all the evidence you give. Quicker, much cheaper. But you have a situation, and I always say, in many cases, going to court is, it's often a deliberate attack. It's not a rational way. It's from someone who almost doesn't want to have an agreement. They just want their way, and that's it. And so she just went into all out war and doing these terrible lies, basically these legal claims, which you then have to, so you were kind of forced into that legal situation, and but keeping the cost down thanks to working with Celia. But with the mediation side of things, do you see that there's I know it's very hard when she's been quite irrational and untruthful, quite frankly, in some of her behaviour. Sometimes people, when they discover that the court's not going their way, if there's a clear uh, proposal for them that maybe gives them a little bit of wiggle room, that they can knock you down a bit and feel like they've still won, sometimes they will come back to mediation, or agree to an arbitrator. So you keeping that open as a possibility, because people often don't. They get stuck in the court system and they don't get, they think, oh, that hasn't worked, but actually no, you can come out of it any time, and
Mhm.
boom, it can be sorted.
So when I'm trying to figure out what's the right amount of detail. So when we entered into mediation, the untruths weren't present. The irrationality was high, um, in terms of me being restricted to only being able to see my daughter for 2 hours a day and 3 days at a time, and her not having any extended time with me before she was age 11. And so, these were some of the parts where I just said I'm not going to accept it, and she was unwilling to compromise it at all on those things, and so we needed arbitration or a court.
Mm.
When the judge told us in the first hearing, you all should be sorting this out between yourselves, there's no reason for you to be here, I reached out again, even though I'd been accused of harassment and manipulation and all these types of things. I just said, I know what I'm vulnerable to, but they're welcome to read this email.
Mm.
And please, like, we have co-parenting agreements that we've each drafted. There's no reason why we can't sit down and talk or enter into mediation, but there's no point in trying to do that if you're not willing to compromise and recognize that both of us need to be involved in our daughter's lives, in our daughter's life. And so I don't think mediation is an option for us. I would definitely encourage everybody else on the planet
Well,
to
absolutely
to
not. What?
start
Not
there.
whilst, yeah, not whilst she thinks that she should have 100% and you have practically nothing. That's not a good position to go into. I was only talking about if it gets to the point where she believes a court is not going to go her way,
Yeah,
because she's obviously
I'll
still
find
under
that
that.
out.
She's clearly under the delusion at the moment that she's got a fighting chance, and she hasn't, because it's completely unacceptable for the child. 'Cause
And
it's all about the
it's
child,
actually,
not about you guys. It's about the child, isn't it?
mhm. And it shifted actually in the wrong direction to where now, she was there in March of this year, and now she's requesting I have about 18 hours of exposure in a secure facility with supervision,
Yeah.
even though nothing has happened between March and now to change that. So we're moving in the wrong direction to be reasonable. And
Yeah, she's doing all out bullying, but there comes a point where she realizes it doesn't work, and either at that point the court step in and just go, this is ridiculous, and give you, I mean, whatever happens, you need a defined contact order. So
yeah,
and that's the thing. So even if she did come back and say, okay, I'll agree to this and this, it even then you may still go, I need a defined contact order, because there's no trust anymore, and she's so pushed it, which is so stupid on her part. She's ultimately not gonna, it's irrational behavior. Maybe there is a mental illness issue at play, and that's what makes it very, very particularly difficult. So when you're talking about your daughter, have you got help with, because it may sound odd to have co-parenting help when you're not allowed to be co-parenting, but what have you got any thoughts on that for particularly dads who are in the same position who might be listening to this?
I, so I may have done myself a little bit of a disservice in terms of the UK system, because in the United States, a lot of times co-parenting agreements will run dozens and dozens of pages. And so I pulled up a template that was used in the UK, and agreed to that with my partner. And then we kind of did our own homework. And this is before all the drama just escalated. And so we developed our, our ideal agreement as each one of us saw it. She was focused on the next year. I was focused until my child was an independent adult. And so I spent, I don't, well over 50 hours, right? Like doing research in books about like what's the best interface with fathers, and trying to figure out like what are the things I'm not thinking about, going to people that were divorced and talking to them. I even interviewed a couple of my friends whose parents were divorced and asked like what they would like to have been different. And so I was trying to catch everything. Could she get tattoos when she's 12, or when can she get her ears pierced? Like, is it okay if she's dressed scandalously to go to school? And so all these things that come up that
Yeah.
I learned, parents end up getting into arguments over because everybody looks at life a little bit differently. I wanted to put it in there so we could have a discussion. And because we knew each other fairly well, I knew about 70% of that were shared visions of our child's future. Some of it I'd never really had crossed my mind. And, whether it was about safety or how they interact with friends, or all that kind of stuff. And was even getting into like what types of exposures she would have to different languages and music, and that kind of
Yeah,
stuff. But
well, that's great. I think that sounds a wonderful co-parenting plan, but at the right time of the process.
yeah,
It's,
well, so
yeah,
that was shared, and the response was, what a controlling individual is trying to micromanage every aspect of his daughter's life, and blah blah blah, and that's been submitted to the court as evidence, and whatever. So there's some issues there, but I do think, like, whether I shared all of that or none of that, or focused on the first year, that background was super helpful for me to
yes,
really recognize the fullness of what it means to be a dad. And again, started some of those thoughts within my head about like, not what does it mean to be a dad right now, and is she fed and changed and not crying, and
yeah,
hopefully smiling from time to time, but really like how do I want to support her into becoming the person that she's supposed to be. And so that was really helpful for me to go through that. Hopefully I'll have the chance to implement some or all of that in the years to come. And I think if I'd had a reasonable partner, even if there'd been like intense areas of disagreement, I would have loved it if she'd shared something like that with me, even if I didn't like some of what was there, because it would
absolutely.
have just been so much to work with, and to see all of the overlap in commitment to our child's future, and also recognize that our visions might be a little bit different because we're two different people, and to see where we want those visions to align. Maybe something is like she doesn't have to do X, Y, or Z, and so we pull that back and say let's let her discover that herself. But to be able to have that conversation with somebody in a reasonable manner, that would have been incredibly, I think, a fulfilling and enriching experience for the two of us to have, even as our lives were going down separate paths, because it would have kept us focused on what was important, which was our child.
Which is why I'm going to ask if you could perhaps make a template available, because I'd love to put it in the divorce hub. Because even if it's a thought process, they're in for anyone who joins the Secret Divorce Group now, they get the access to Detour Life, which is the platform which a lot of people use for the financials, but there's a template co-parenting plan in there, which takes people through the standard process, but as a way just to as a thought process, as you said, even if it's not, you don't put all of those things straight into the co-parenting plan, especially draft one, and you've got a difficult person, might not be what you decide to do, but to go through it yourself, to think it through, I think it's be a really, really valuable resource.
Sure, I'm happy to share
It doesn't need
mine.
to
I
be,
think it's
yeah,
12 or 13 pages, and
that's
can
fine.
also pull the
Yeah.
content out. But I tried to wrestle with like what kind of interface do we want her to have with religious institutions, and how do we deal
Uh,
with education and all
it,
these types of things.
Well,
So
those should be in the. I'm pretty sure they're going to be in the template in Detail Life, because they are absolutely critical. In
mhm,
fact, because it's a co-parenting plan. Some people think it's just about who picks them up when and how much time,
yeah,
who's got them in the holidays. It's like no, this is to avoid ongoing arguments. And
mhm,
and again, going back to, you may not have agreed on everything. I always say to people, um, if you use mediation for your co-parenting plan, which obviously is the best thing to use for it, you don't
mhm.
really want a judge telling you how to co-parent, which is what she's forcing, which is, I thought, quite humiliating, quite frankly. Much better that you decide between the two of you. But if you go into a mediation session to talk about a plan, you will not agree on everything. No parents agree on everything.
Sure.
But what you'll do is have heard the other person's views. And
Hmm.
that's enough. In some things, you'll just have to go, well, I'll have to agree to disagree, but I understand where you're coming from. And also, if you have used something like mediation, you know that in a couple of years' time, and everything's different, a new
Hmm.
person's on the scene, the child's older, you've got somewhere to go back to that's a safe space to update those discussions. And I think that's wouldn't it be nice if all parents could do that, actually? Even
Hmm.
if they weren't getting divorced, I think it would be a wonderful way to do things. Did you work at all, remind me, with any of the co-parent, was it Jenny Rock? Did you get a chance to work with Jenny, the co-parenting?
No, for the co-parenting, I did it on my own, and kind of with some support from like my I don't know, my community, I guess. There was one thing you just said, Susie, which I think is really crucial. And honestly, I think if I'd sat down and tried to think about it, it would have been toward the end of my considerations and wrestling with the plan that I would have come to it. But that need, at one point I circled back to one of my friends that I talked to before and was asking some more questions, and they're like, look, you want to make this as comprehensive as possible, but also you're never going to be able to think of all the different like twists and turns to somebody's life. And so you just need to plan on, making sure you've got the most important foundational components. If there's things that are important to you, put that in there, have those conversations. And then after that, you just need to be able to book time, whether it's every quarter, every year, or if you all have a really easy relationship, which we don't, they were like, you can probably push it out to every 2 years.
Mm.
But where you just have a regular visit, like you sit down and revisit the agreement and talk about how many new surprises have come up, and do we need to sort this out, or do we let our child figure that out, or and so that the need to have flexibility built into that, I thought was yeah, was really useful. And I did ask some people about, what's the right timing, and it really seems specific to the relationship, and that if you push it out, most people felt between 18 and 24 months is going to be way too long. And that if you've got a good relationship, it probably should be every like 3 or 4 months that you sit down and just, even if it's for 5 minutes, to say, this is a easy quarter, nothing new to touch base on. Let's see what happens this next one, and then take it from there. So.
That's the ideal. And others who they've needed to have the mediator hold the space, or a parenting coach, whatever, whoever they've used to get that cut to create a safe space for them both. Often they'll book in, whether it's 6 months or a year. They
Mhm.
have it in the diary, and they're going to go for that, like you say, and that regular touching base, because it is the most important job you'll ever do. And I think particularly in England, our culture does not rate it as highly. And I'm always shocked how many people, when they're getting divorced, they say, well, have you done your co-parenting plan? And they're like, what? And they're too busy thinking about the money. And I'm like, go and use the template. It's so important. And it will also quite often affect the money, because
Yeah.
there can be quite serious discussions there. We just wanted to point out again for anyone who might be listening here, that the often someone like Jenny Rock, who is a co-parenting expert, but also specialized in very difficult parents, where there's a narcissism or really irrational, difficult behavior. So even once you've got that court order, hopefully, because for some people you need that, most cases it's not necessarily, but sometimes I think in yours definitely you need that. It's defined, this is it, and if she doesn't do it, she's breaking the law. That still doesn't mean that person's not going to try and mess around and change the boundaries. So quite often she's working with parents after that stage to help them make sure, and to ensure rather, that the other parent doesn't get a little bit wibbly wobbly on those rules. And because you have to, it's not the end of it, it's the beginning of the next stage, and it needs to be enforced. So I don't want to be depressing about it. It's not a bad stage to be at, because at least you've got some kind of legal representation. And sometimes that boundary setting by the court is what that other person needs, and their behavior, I've seen it before, where they suddenly actually become okay to deal with, because they just needed to know, no, that's as far as you can't do that. And they're like, oh, okay.
Mhm.
That's
I
just what
was
they need.
advised, for those who have somebody really difficult that they're working with, I was advised that it's not unusual for there to be multiple onslaughts of behavior that's just not productive. And so that was part of why, this conversation around, like, how are you going to streamline and simplify communications so that's clear and things aren't taken advantage of, and even had friends that were attorneys reflect the same conversation that I was having with my solicitor in the UK. Just share, you need some time, and they didn't know if it was a couple of years, or maybe a really extended period of time where you have really no physical interaction at all, because you are at a place where, um, what's been happening, it seems like the next thing to happen is there to be allegations of physical abuse, and then even if you're just going to pick up a child, you don't go in the house and you meet her at the doorstep, that can make you vulnerable to additional allegations that have no basis, that you have to fight regardless. And the more that you can kind of, in the messiest of circumstances, find ways to kind of limit your vulnerabilities to those things, kind of manage and mitigate your risk, the better off you'll be. I'm hoping that whatever that time is not too long, and that there can be a way for us to be reasonable with each other and not have to worry about those types of risks. But I'm going to be pretty careful about making sure that,
Yeah.
we're doing things in public and all the communications tracked and monitored, and that type of stuff.
And that's where our family wizard is very useful, and also a co-parenting plan, which is different to the diary. The diary is just the practical application of it, but the plan, these are the things that need to be in the plan, because it is, where you pick up and drop off, and this is a psychology of you need to go into. That's where some of the professionals that I often encourage people to use at that stage is because they have been in these difficult situations, and they'll know, right, oh, if you do that, they can accuse you of this or that, and it's something that you actually want to get into the plan straight
Yeah.
off. And that's because that plan is the basis of the courts, what you want the courts to rubber stamp. And the court system works on the basis of, well, the legal system works on the basis that everyone's really reasonable, as you probably noticed, and they just don't know how to handle the fact that you've got one person who just isn't anymore for whatever reason, and they're going to use the court system to beat you up with and threaten you, until they can't, and that's it. Unfortunately, the court system itself is often inept at enforcing it, so you can get your court orders, but you still got to, you don't want to have to be dragged back to court to make them do what the other court order already told them to do. And these are unfortunately the things that can happen. So the more you can retrain their behavior during this process, the better, because you definitely don't want to rely just on the law. It's
Right.
a backstop, but it's not the only one. But you've been doing incredibly well, and you have been keeping chipper despite everything. What To round off, what would be your, if you were saying to someone right now who was, whether or not they were, particularly if they were, their ex is likely to get a bit tricky, and particularly if they've got children involved, whether they're married or not, what would your advice be as far as joining the secret divorce group?
I think it's been really helpful in providing resources that I didn't know exist. And so, if I tried to do this on my own, I know I wouldn't. I would have been spending more money. I know that I would have been spending a lot more time, just trying to make sense of everything that's happening. I know that I would feel a little bit more isolated and without some of, the tools that are there to kind of facilitate things. And I know, just as I look out to the future, that the group provides access to, everything from like a support network to chat with, to, actual professionals that can help along the way, and just information that can be at people's fingertips, to really not just look at where you are in the present, but where you, are moving toward in the future, in ways that maybe can help you move in a way that you'd like to, and to try and help you take take back or take control in as much as you're able to, and to kind of grow that space in a way that's healthy for you and or your family in the days and years to come. So I found it an incredibly valuable resource. I'm so glad I lucked out by coming across it on a Google search and bumping into your TED Talk, which is how I first encountered it, and then started to dig around some more. But yeah, I'm very grateful, and hope that others are benefiting now. I know that several are, that I've come across in some of the discussions, but hope that others are doing so just as much, and it'll be just as useful of a tool in the future.
Thank you. And did you make use of the chat, the live chat, and the meetup, monthly meetup?
I did the monthly meetup a few different times, and even though it sounds a little bit weird, it was also helpful to hear people that were going through very different things than I was, but there was always a little bit of an overlap. And if not a big overlap, even with the little overlaps, there tended to be a takeaway or two from, what was being shared or what was being listened to. And I found those to be helpful. And the chats, I think, were both posing circumstances and situations, again, might not be directly similar to mine, but that you could look through a couple and almost invariably find something that makes you kind of pause and reflect and say, oh, I need to start doing that, or I haven't considered this. And so there's just great takeaways from that interchange that's happening, both kind of statically in the chats and then the live interaction that's going on. And I think if you have something that you're really wrestling with in the live discussions, you can get feedback both from people that have been there and done that, sometimes professionals, and even just others that are kind of down in the mud with you, trying to slog through. But just having different perspectives and areas of expertise is just really invaluable.
And just because I like to end on something really positive, it's 5 years from now. What's the situation?
The plan is that I'm talking with my daughter every day. That at a minimum, we're having several months together over the summer and holidays, and seeing each other some weeks in the interim. And yeah, that I've found a way to have my ex not feel threatened by the role that I'm playing in my daughter's life, and that she has a sense of a lot of care and support from both of us, and that all of this stuff is a painful but very distant memory. So we'll see if we can get there, but there's a lot of different permutations that are possible, but that's the hope.
That's my my manifest. I'm manifesting it for you now, Paul, because that's definitely what you and your daughter deserve, and her mum, because this is all good for her mum too. Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'll let you enjoy the rest of your day.
And all right. Well, thank you, Susie. It was good to see you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.